Now I call upon Mr. T S Ravikumar to speak on the next topic, that is the management of disaster or preparedness for disaster. You could kindly look at his achievements and his qualifications. I think no wonder with such able people around here that CMC just the other day has achieved NABH accreditation. I think we need to put our hands together to congratulate the team. Over to Mr. Ravikumar.
Thank you, sir. Indeed, I'm deeply happy and thank God for the superlatives with which sir is appreciated. But I want to thank Ms. Lalu for setting the foundation on disaster mitigation, which has played a very key role in disaster management. The focus of this particular presentation of mine will mainly concentrate on the common questions that we see when we handle on disaster management with relation to hospital. So when we look at disaster, we are trying to talk about an incident which will have the right stuff or the staff at the right place at the right time. And that's what we call putting a focus that we reduce the impact of disaster. So the incident management is the key. But the problem is that in reality it sounds fine, but there are many questions and many difficulties that we enhance because of that. Now if you look at that, there are terminology which I am not going to touch in detail, but there are many terminologies that are being used in disaster scenario now. You find mass casualty incidents, which we talk about a lot of patients who come into the system at a given time and you don't have the resources to handle that, and you have an incident command and hazard vulnerability. In most of the conferences or the workshop, you will find all of them being presented and being focused on. But this particular moment, the focus will be on these questions that we have. Number one is that disaster management is a complex system. It's not a particular team or a particular group or a particular discipline which will be part to handle the disaster. It has to be done in such a manner, it all has to work together as a team, as like presented towards the last slide of ma'am. Because team is mandatory. Two, budget. It's easy to talk about disaster management, but then when we talk about a disaster mitigation, you talk about building safety, you talk about electrical safety, that needs budget. With due respect to the treasury, I'm sure the first question that they ask is that, do we put in 25 lakhs, do we put in 30 lakhs, and what is that in return that is going to come? Now if you're going to show us statistics and say, and they may ask, you know, show back when was the last disaster. So if you look at yesterday's slides that were presented, you find about the fire of the last decade, you will find one incident connected to hospital. Most of them with school and factory and road and mass casualty of road incidences and things like that. So ultimately you will show one hospital with a casualty rate of 50. And then I'm sure the people with the budget would say, would we spend 25 lakhs for a small incident which is not being so common as we see? So we have a trouble over there. And third, it's a high turnover of people in the hospital. It's not just like, you know, like a factory where people work for long period of time in the same place. It's a turnover. If you go for Hawaii for your, what do you call, vacation or honeymoon, and those who are married in little age still can go on honeymoon, second round or third round. And if you go on, you will find it's highly prone for tsunami. And you go in the hotel, there will be a board written there. It says that if you have water coming into the room, keep your legs up on the bed. Okay, as simple as that. They are preparing, even if you go as a tourist, to say that, look, be prepared, there can water come under your bed at any time. So the point is, the fourth one that we look at is the paper syndrome. Paper syndrome is a phenomenal problem with disaster management. You look at, there are volumes of manuals, and you can open up to the net and ask for a PDF on any hospital's disaster preparedness plan manual. You will get phenomenally beautiful manuals. But the problem is, they are more stuck to a paper. Not because that the system is like that, because of the high turnover of people. So when people come in, you're going to train them on color coding and talk about the orange is for this, pink is for this, and blue is for that. And I was talking to somebody and asked, what does the pink color mean? They said, pink color means Valentine's Day. Okay, so I think it's, so there are a lot of things that can be associated. And the fifth one is that there are many factors that put hospitals at risk. And you also, most important you find, is the functional collapse. See, sometimes you will have problem with the structure which are minimal, but the functional collapse may not be there. In other words, you may continue the service or continue the care in spite of the structural collapse. But if the structural collapse, even in the absence of a structural collapse, there is a functional collapse, that's a problem. So the very focus of disaster management is there is no functional collapse. Meaning that there's a disaster, you relocate, you move the patients to a safer zone, but the care continues. The antibiotic is given in time, the care continues. It's easily said than done, but the focus is on functional maintenance. There's one dictum in disaster is that do not replace disaster or relocate disaster. Sometimes what we have, I have a problem in the ward, I relocate and hand it over to some other team so that they take over. If we do not relocate, we have to be prepared for functional. Now, mitigation is cheaper than management of disaster. It's very important for us to remember. I think it's important when we talk about the budget, we need to say that if you spend this much time in mitigation, it's good enough that you will not be spending a lot of time, a lot of money at a later occasion. So the emphasis is on mitigation. Interestingly, the most costly hospital is the one that fails. This is an evidence-based presentation that I do. You may be surprised to say, no, usually when you put a lot of money in, you try to say, look, they'll do it best. But the problem is when you put a lot of money in, our mindset is that we look at that the money, how do I get it back in return? So everywhere that you put in money, you're watching for, am I putting in this unit? Am I putting in this investigation? So do it best so the money comes in return. The one neglected area where the money doesn't come in return, but only the lives are saved is disaster. And that's why this problem is there. So the present scenario is that we are all talking about building collapse, we are all talking about earthquake, but the most dangerous is the aerosol infection. If there is going to be a bioterrorism, which I don't want to go in detail and deliberate and give you ideas how to do that, I would rather put it that if there is a bioterrorism, and the easiest, you think about the sarin gas that was used at the basement on the tube train in Tokyo, in Japan. It's very dangerous. When you have a tube train, when you run in and you live in some infectious aerosol, and that's quite dangerous. Now, if you look at most of our hospitals are confined space. They're all closed. You have air conditioned, you are ventilated, you are all confined space. There's no open air outlet for the organisms to move out. So it becomes vulnerable. Then mass casualty associated with crowd. You know that recently I was talking to a group of students and said, where is the massive crowd gathering? A library or the movie theater? Obviously it was the movie theater. So when there is a collapse in a crowd, there is a problem of that. See, recently I saw that in a paper clipping that there was a cyclone in Chennai, and they said that there is a possibility of tsunami. What did the people do? They all went to the beach to see whether the tsunami, how is it like? See, it's very difficult to look at if we have a mindset to visualize tsunami. I said that's good. It's good that they went because they would have gone, they are the only people who would have seen the tsunami inside. I mean, not from the outside. So there is a problem with that. Then, high cost, high technique. Today, I'll try to, if time permits, show you some clippings where people are talking about high, because we need to be aware of what we do in India with what we have. That's very important. You can always look at a lot of pictures in the internet and a lot of things which are high tech. But the question is it relevant as of today? Now, when I was buying my watch recently, I mean few years back, the seller hugged me. He sold in the shop, it was in Malaysia. Then I was talking to the shop and he said, so what type of watch do you want? I have a watch with chronometer, altimeter, barometer and all that kind of stuff. So he asked me, what kind of a watch you want? I said, I want a watch which shows the time. So he hugged me. He said, sir, in my 15 years, I have never had anybody asking for a watch which shows only the time. Okay. So interestingly, what happens is that we do have gadgets like that. I'm sure you have a high-tech mobile. Only 15% of that we use like our brain. I mean, research says that. I'm not saying that. Okay, we use a lot of things. So we are more, fall into novelty to go for high-cost, high-technique. Not necessary. So this is a small inclination where it shows where had been the significant events that had occurred globally, whether it's biological, whether it is a technological or a hydro-related or mechanical and things like that go on to that. Disaster management is a complex system. Now if you look at this is one of my favorite pictures which I have, and I do have a great honor for Colonel, because my passion in my life are only two things, passion for Christ and passion for military. I love and I'm thankful to God that I am in disaster management, which is almost like equivalent to military, but being in nursing is paramilitary. That's a different story. I don't want to elaborate that in detail. Okay. If you look at the complexity, the problem is that the soldier's focus is very simple. He has to save the country, if necessary, to kill the enemy. And you see what all he has to carry to do that. Now that's exactly disaster management. In disaster management, what we need to do is that we need to safeguard the hospital in order the patient life is saved. To do that, we need to do a lot of things. So when you do a lot of things, we get lost with what purpose we have been called for the war. Disaster management is a war involving a complex system. Plate tectonics, I don't want to go in detail, but I want to remind you, you are not sitting in Scudder Auditorium. You are sitting over the Indian plate in the tectonic plate. So if the Indian plate and tectonic plate chooses now to move a little, my session gets over. Okay? So that's why we need to be aware of that. So we are trying to show the model that we did, and I think Mrs. Lallu certainly gave an apt prelude to that, is that this is a recommendation. Actually, this is the total of my presentation is only this side. Number one is that any organization, any institution, any school, anywhere there is a structured area should have a mandatory safety cell or unit or a department. It's very important to have that. Two, you should have a competency-based training. Attending workshops, attending conferences are all fine. It's an information. But we need a competency, skill-based training. We need triage, we need extrication, evacuation. We need how do we handle a patient who's on ventilator in intensive care unit, and you have to transfer him in a disaster scenario. So who's going to back him? Where is the oxygen cylinder for that? You've got a safe zone, but you have a ventilator there. How do you do all that? These are all what we need to have a competency-based training. Then we need to have a customized hospital safety index. WHO, if you open PAN WHO, beautifully gives a lot of safety indexes which can be customized to our own hospitals. We can do that. But we need to have a customized safety index. And finally, we need to have a curriculum which is competency-based. So these are very important. We look at 3 levels of preparedness in the curriculum. 1, awareness. Personal preparedness and staff role within the department. The second, mid-level. Leadership level within department, department role within hospital. And third, we need to talk about the advanced level, leadership level within hospital, hospital role within community. Now, it should be very simple, like what we do in cardiopulmonary resuscitation. It's like, what do we say? If there is a problem, call for help. That's all. So anybody who comes to your hospital, patient, relative, student, high turnover, no problem. Give them only one dictum, to call this number or to contact this. The second level should be trained, and the third level should be expertise. In our institution, we have what we call STSG, Specially Trained Security Group, who have been exclusively trained for this in transportation, but they are not medical personnel. So what do we do in an ICU? There's a medical personnel who takes over control of the patient, and the STSG will assist in doing the physical part of shifting and moving. So we need to train or equip people at this 3 level. It is not the primary level person who need to be highly trained, and it is not the expertise person who is not aware of what is going on. So it should be performance oriented, and it should be critical for a disaster response, but the ultimate goal is that sustain the infrastructure to maintain the medical treatment and services towards patient care. Now, disaster has to be well defined when we talk about in hospital. It's not a small event of 5-10 people coming. If you look at em-dat, it's a beautiful website which gives all the needed data on international on disaster management. You can become a member, it's free of cost, and it's quite useful, em-dat. So you'll find they define it like that. It should be more than 10 or more than 100 injured, declaration of state of emergency, and most important, that is not necessarily international, it needs an external assistance. So that is why if I talk about Vellore, Vellore should have a plan, CMC should have a plan with MOU with other hospitals around. In the event of a disaster, we work together so that the patients can be moved into different areas. Surge capacity is one important thing. You know, we mostly find lack of space. Even ambulance do not have space parking. Fire people certainly do agree with me that they do not find places for parking. But surge capacity, we do not even plan for surge capacity. We do not, even new hospital do not plan for decontamination zone. There has to be what called decon zone for cleaning the patients for further management. So it's important for a surge capacity. This is an international model of surge capacity which looks far better than my house. And I think we can't afford to go about. This will cost in lakhs. But we can customize in our own country to look at how we can do that. So our focus should be on national level to have a e-learning module on disaster management, whereby you teach and train people on curriculum based, on a competency based, give hands-on on a contact classes. And second, build your own town. If your town is safe, you are safe. If your town is not safe, you are not safe. So our focus is on Vellore. We have moved this far in building the institution. Our next step is to reaching out to the people. And that's how we need to standardize. We need to have journals on this. We need to train children because they are more effective. You know about Type E. Type E is a beautiful, it's 101 floors, and the lift is 29 seconds it takes from the first floor to the 91st floor. So that's the speed with which they go. Now what is the disaster plan they have? They have a plan of a pendulum kind of stuff inside. It's physics. You know, I failed 2 times in physics in +2, so I can't go in detail about that. Okay? So, but the whole interesting thing, there is a definitely customized indigenous plan, and it's important that we do that. The best part is that the Type A building is sitting on, in Taiwan, is sitting on a tectonic plate vulnerable for earthquake. I will show you an Israel model.
On the 10th of October 2010, the Rambam Medical Center laid the foundation for the largest underground hospital in the world. A generous contribution from the Sami Ofer family and assistance from the government of Israel enabled the start of this crucial project for national emergencies, the building of a 2,000-bed emergency subterranean hospital in case of an enemy attack on the Israeli home front. On a daily basis, the building will be in use as a huge, sophisticated parking lot. In wartime, it could be converted within 48 hours into a fully functional hospital, protected from missile attacks and chemical warfare. To support the massive building, a 5-acre pit was dug 60 feet deep. The pouring of the foundations began in October. For 36 hours straight, over 1,000 cement mixers ferried concrete to the site, making this the largest project of its kind in northern Israel. To complete the foundations, 4 more similar operations will be carried out during the winter months.
The attack, having to lead the treatment and therapy for all the casualties of the civilian population around us, and at the same time the casualties of the army that were actually brought to us from the fierce battles in Lebanon.
This was not something we took into account. The fact that the hospital itself could be vulnerable, that we were saving lives on the one.
So if you look at that, that's the latest one. It's a 2,000-bedded underground hospital, the biggest in the world in Israel. Israel is supposed to be one of the best in disaster preparedness for the simple reason they face disaster every day. It is not because of any other reason. Why we are not disaster prepared is that we are not facing it that common in our own place. So that's the lapse. So what they do is a complete car park which is ready with oxygen suction, which is already built and is converted in 48 hours into a hospital setting. Well, that's only a military operation. I don't think civilians can be involved in that, but the whole thing works onto that. So I wouldn't go in detail onto that. We've spoken about this earlier. So this is the plan that was shown over there where you convert beds. You know, the car park area is converted into a patient care bed area. So again, I go back to the slide which I pointed earlier, and that's all that we need to speak and a communicate message to all gathered over here is that we need to have, number one, is mandatory to have a safety cell or a safety department. 2, a competency-based training, customized safety index, and disaster curriculum. If we do that, the focus will be that what we can with what we have is important. I think we need to look at that. We can't say I need all the thing best right to have a disaster. That's not possible to do that. We have to look at what we have and what best we can do with what we have. And I'm sure with that we can develop a structured training, curriculum-based safety cell, and then with a customized index, your hospital becomes safe. When your hospital becomes safe, inevitably the environment becomes safe. With that note, I would like to thank you all and thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ravikumar, for a very comprehensive presentation on disaster management.